Welcome to Toast in the Classics, the podcast where we take something that people call a classic and we, in this case, read it while we talk about it and have a drink. We're going to decide whether it still deserves to be called a classic. My name is Dave McArthur. Today I've got with me...
I'm returning Bill Hodges.
Bill
I'm bringing
Hodges.
him back. I'm bringing him back to you.
What an interesting first name your mother gave you.
Returning? I'm a junior, actually.
Maybe you're a regular Bill Hodges, but like you have a +1 magic weapon bonus, but it's returning.
I throw it out there and it comes
throw Bill
right back?
Hodges at somebody and it's always right back.
You have to stay in the same space. That's the only problem with that.
So we're doing sort of a suite of nature-related programming for everybody. What have we done? We did Into the Wild. Well, Sherman Alexie's not really nature-related, but the West related. This time we decided to do something definite. Well, not even really nature-related, is it? Outdoors.
Outdoors related for sure, and definitely nature.
Definitely nature/outdoors related. So what we're doing is the 1998 nonfiction book, kind of nonfiction as it turns out. Is it A Walk in the Woods or Walk in the Woods? It's A.
The official title is A Walk in the Woods Rediscovering America on the Appalachian Trail.
Appalachia. I like it when people say Appalachia. Do you know anything about the etymology of the word Appalachian?
No. That would be interesting to look at.
But anyway, this is a 1998 nonfiction book by Bill Bryson. He is a noted nonfiction author, quasi travel writer. I read his book In a Sunburnt Country about Australia, and it was actually quite informative. And there's a bit where he's talking about the one pool in Melbourne named after the Prime Minister of Australia who drowned and how ironic that was. And I actually was like driving through Melbourne. I was like, oh, there's the place named after...
My first intro to him was A Short History of Nearly Everything.
I've heard of that. What is that about?
That's like a 500-page cosmic natural history retelling within like 500 words. So it's really a fascinating piece of science.
Pages, right?
500 page, yeah, from the creation of the universe, Big Bang through modern day. And it's really interesting. It's an amazing piece of science communication and science. He's won a number of awards, which is what I really think is interesting about the guy for his science communication. But yeah, so there's those two. I actually just got another one of his that he's actually the editor on. It's a history of the Royal Society, which is a British kind of science association of sorts.
Yeah. My first introduction to Bill Bryson was, I think it was like 1984, his hit song "If Ever You're in My Arms Again." And also he was one of the voices on A Whole New World. Oh wait, no, sorry. That was that's Peebo Bryson. I always get those. So I had not read this before. I had read Sunburnt Country, and I think I read one of the ones he wrote about the English language. But anyway, what's the basic premise of this book?
So he moves back in the early 90s from having lived in the UK, in Britain, for a number of years. He comes back with his wife and kids, and he's kind of trying to reacclimate to living in the United States. He was born in Des Moines and raised in Des Moines, and he and his family move out to New England. And
he's one of America's great Iowans, along with Captain Kirk, Herbert Hoover, and me.
Are you an Iowan?
I was born in Iowa.
It's like saying I'm from Anaheim.
Were you born in Anaheim?
I was.
That's weird. That's a new fact about you. You're so not Anaheim.
Right.
I feel like when people see me, they might mistake me for someone from Iowa. I feel like that's not that.
Maybe
awful.
Living in New York, they're like, dude.
In New York, everybody just thinks I'm a fat tourist from Kansas. Like everybody just treats me as if I just rolled in off the bus from Sheboygan.
Des Moines.
Yeah, Des Moines, exactly. Yeah. So sorry, you were saying.
And so he decides that he's going to get back to his roots and rediscover like the natural world. He decides that it's a really good idea to hike the entirety of the Appalachian Trail.
It is a good idea, and it's not just a good idea, it's the good idea. I've been obsessed with the idea of doing it my whole life. I've been thinking about doing the AT. I remember I was a little tiny kid, and my parents signed up for this thing where you had to go to a conference center and listen to people talk about selling a timeshare to you. And then if you sat through the whole thing, then you would get like a prize at the end of the day. So I remember we were there, and they were trying to sell you a timeshare in Florida. And they were like, okay, we're walking off to Florida. And I was like, on the Appalachian Trail. And my parents were like, be quiet. You're gonna ruin this for us. Like I got in a lot of trouble for mentioning the AT, but we're not that old. We're not too old. Do you think we're too old? Do you think our time is
No, absolutely not. There are
okay?
people who are like in their 70s and 80s doing this.
Okay.
You know,
All right. So I'm not.
for me, it was kind of it's the West Coast equivalent, right? So there's the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail.
How does that compare in terms of development? And
It's a little longer,
it is long, really?
because it goes from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to basically the U.S. Canada border.
Okay, but
Um,
the weird thing about it is it's like when you think about the Appalachian Trail, I think most Americans' heads like it's on the East Coast, right? So you'd be like, I think you'd be very surprised how wild it ends up being if you're on the Appalachian Trail. Whereas like when I think of the Pacific Crest Trail, I'm thinking, oh, it's just like the middle of nowhere, like places where you might see Bigfoot, stuff like that, like up in the Cascades and places
yeah,
like that, right? Like that's
yeah.
grizzly bears and stuff once you get up into Washington State. And I think it is wilder in some ways, but the AT is surprisingly wild.
We're definitely getting a lot more big mountains, right? Because you're going through the Sierra, you're getting up to the tallest mountain in the continental U.S., right?
You'd have to, right? You'd have to
Yeah,
go
you
through
you go you go through Whitney. Yeah,
like Whitney and yeah, okay.
yeah,
So
and like the Mount Adams range, and then you're going
mhm.
up to, I think you end
Good,
up like going up.
good and near and huge, huge mountains. And the weird thing about those mountains is, okay, first of all, Mount Whitney is the biggest mountain in the continental United States, the highest mountain in the continental United States. But you can see from the top of Mount Whitney the lowest point in the continental United States. You can go from Badwater Basin to the top of Mount Whitney in one day if you have a car, easily.
Yeah, I've
You know?
I've I've actually done it. I did it
Yeah, I was
a
gonna say
year
I know
ago.
lots of so the relief would also I think if it's the same length or even longer than the AT, it must just be a million times harder. I think one of the things of the Appalachian Trail is a lot more humid. So I feel like you may actually be dealing with more issues in terms of wildlife and not I mean and I don't mean like bears. I mean the little things, ticks and all kinds of other problems that you might have on the trail. It would almost be worse because of the humidity. You're probably not going to run into a lot of rain on the Pacific Crest, I wouldn't think.
Depending on where you're at, I mean, once you get up well, when you're in the Sierra, there's a decent amount of precipitation. There's a decent amount of snow. Once you get up into
There's no, but I've been up in the.
Washington State, you're dealing with temperate rainforest.
Are you though when you're in the Cascades? I don't think so.
Not necessarily in the Cascades, but once you get over towards like the Olympic Peninsula
Is that where the trail goes?
there.
That would be a very different experience. I'm picturing it going up through like North Cascades National Park. I really don't know, and I don't know why we're yammering about this while we're talking. That's something I would like that. And then I think there's another one in the Rockies, but it's not used as much, and I don't think it's complete. I think because I remember there was a town in New Mexico called Silver City, and it was a through point for whatever that trail is that does the Rockies.
There's like a
I can't remember what it's called
central
though.
U.S. route that does exactly that. There's also one that goes across horizontally.
See, that would be so boring. You're just walking across Kansas for like a month. Like that'd be the worst.
Can you imagine retracing like the Oregon Trail?
Yeah, yeah, it would be bad. I mean, it would have been really interesting in those days, right? Like if you were crossing, can you imagine crossing the prairie? Like the sort of, untrammeled prairie would have been fascinating, right? But today, like you're just going across a bunch of farms, it would be pretty
I mean,
dull.
dangerous AF.
Yeah, well, not the least of which because you might run into a raiding party of Comanche while you're trying to cross it. But there'd be a lot of problems. But so anyway, so
So
what's
we've digressed some,
we've
but
digressed.
you know what? I think this actually speaks a lot to a lot of the history and the research and background that Bryson spends on this.
We haven't gotten into the book at all, but I think there's two books here. There's two halves to the book.
Hmm.
And the first half is like he's just going to walk the Appalachian Trail. He gets his buddy, this crazy guy. We'll talk more about cats at some point. But they start walking the trail, and then like halfway through the book, they just kind of give up. He goes with his car, and he kind of finishes the rest of the trail in little chunks. That's the part where it sounds more like the Bill Bryson that I've read before. When I read Sunburnt Country, where he's giving you like background information. He actually refers to the author John McPhee, who does a whole bunch of like stuff like this, where you get a whole bunch of fascinating historical, paleontological, geological background to the places. He's writing more like that in the second half. The first half is just a narrative of walking the Appalachian Trail. There's that point where they go to Gatlinburg, I think it is, and they look at the map on the wall and they're just like, "We're never going to make it." Like, I don't know why. Why would you get that far and give up?
Well, I mean, they speak a lot to like the depth and story behind like how the creation of the AT and just how many people just like give up. They were
Yeah.
talking about the part where they're like first starting out on the trail, and you get these folks who are like who go out there with like all this brand new gear, new backpacks, new tents, new everything. They go out there with a couple grand worth of backpacking gear, and then they give up after 3 days because they're just like, what did I get myself into?
What's the farthest you've ever hiked like that?
That's a good. I mean, I haven't done any super long distance things like that. I've done around you when I was living in Yosemite and when I was living in Yellowstone. I did a few like 2, 3 day hikes. When I was in middle school, I did like a week long backpacking trip where we probably did 40, 50 miles. But I mean, past anything past that, I haven't done. I certainly haven't done any really long distance hikes where I'm doing part of the PCT or the AT or some other hike, the John Muir Trail or anything like that. I've done parts of all of those.
I've walked like little day sections of the Appalachian Trail, but no, I've never.
Yeah.
I actually consider myself a pretty experienced hiker, and I've done like some pretty hardcore hikes, but I've really only done day hikes. I've never gone. One time, you and I worked at the National Wildlife Federation, and I played through my 6 months. I stayed on for like an extra month, and then I left. And I was so happy to not be going there anymore that I got a pack and I decided to hike the C&O Canal by myself. I got up to like Leesburg. I think I walked like the first 15 miles and I camped overnight and got up the next day and started walking. And I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I went home. Like, so that's I think the only time I've ever hiked with my stuff on my back and then camped at like overnight and kept going. And I didn't get very far. I way overpacked. My stuff was way too heavy. That was the number one problem. So I feel like I learned a lot just by even trying it, but it's something that I really kind of want to get into. Like I kind of want to be able to hike over like overnight for a couple of days, and I still haven't ever done it.
Do you feel like the telling that Bryson gives us, do you think that that suggests to us that he hadn't really done like he'd done some hikes like you're saying, you've done, you're an experienced hiker,
Hmm.
right? Where you've gone out and you've done a lot of day hiking, but in terms of doing like a really long distance backpacking trip. Do you feel like he had that experience at all when he went into it, or did it come across like he's just going for it and he had no real
They
idea what he was
sounded
doing?
both him and Katz sounded super naive about what it was going to require, but I don't know if he's playing that up and fictionalizing it to some extent. But he's in his 40s when he tries this, right? I feel like I'm in pretty good shape, but I know enough about hiking. Like I've hiked enough to know that I don't know how many miles I could make in a day with 40 pounds on my pack. Like when I think about it, I'm like, I think I would pace myself for like 10 miles a day, at least to start. And
Hmm.
I'd be impressed with myself if I just made that day after day for like a week. Because I know I've done 15 miles in a day, but like not with a pack on my back.
Right.
So I'm trying to imagine how difficult it would be, and I really don't have much of a sense of it. I really would try to keep the weight down as much as I possibly could, and I'm not sure how good I would be at it. You take a tent, and right there you've got 5 pounds, a couple changes of clothes, and some food. Like you got to carry your own water.
You have to carry water or at
Water
least
would be the
contain. Well, water is definitely a hindrance, and so you want to get yourself a filter so you're not just having to carry gallons and gallons of water on
What
your
do you
back.
think about boiling water, though?
I mean, I think you run into the same issue either way, whether you're going and collecting water and then boiling it, or you're going and you're taking a water filter that's going to have less weight. Because then the trade-off, right, becomes okay, well then you have to have the fuel to actually boil it, right?
Well, you
So
use wood,
you could use wood, but more I think more common is these days at least is using more like a
butane or
different
something.
a different fuel source, whether that's why
Not
gasoline
butane.
or
What do
whatever.
you call that
It's
blue
it's
stuff that people use?
yeah, they're the bottles of
Oh my God, the guy had it on the glacier. We made a little meal out on the glacier when we were in Alaska. It's a blue gel.
the isopro.
No, it's
Well, there's white gas, there's propane,
yeah. I've used propane.
there's
I use propane when I camp. That's like my number one. But I wouldn't want to try to carry that when hiking.
no carrying a bunch of propane can be hard because those containers tend to be heavier.
Maybe
The
like
more the more
one. I
common
guess like
stuff now is the isobutane. Oh, the
sterno.
sternos. I wonder about that. That I
That's
I
what we
haven't I
had.
haven't used that on a backpacking trip per se.
That's what
I
we had on the
imagine
glacier
it's
in Alaska. The guy had sterno, and it was like I don't know. I don't know why he chose that instead of something else, but I would imagine for weight, but not that we were going overnight or anything. But
yeah.
anyway, so Bill Bryson does this. He's in his 40s, and like you said, he's at kind of a crisis point in his life because he's just moved back to the States after being in England for years and years. He's married to an English woman. He actually has dual citizenship today after working on it for a long time. But he comes back to the States and he's kind of out of sorts. So he decides he had written a book and I don't think it was very successful. So he decides somehow he gets it in his head to go on an Appalachian trail hike. I'm a married man. I don't know how I could talk my wife into letting me do that and be like, I'm going to go walk the Appalachian Trail for six.
Bill and I are going to take off in March.
Yeah. Like if we could get a month, I'd be doing handstands. I'd be so happy I was allowed to have a month. How far do you think we could get in a month? Maybe we could try it. Maybe we could like do months. It's 2,000 miles altogether. If we did like a month at a time, we could probably break it up into 6 months over the course of the next 10 years. We could probably do that.
Easy, right?
Yeah. Well, not easy, but possible anyway.
Reason,
So.
not unreasonable, not unreasonable.
Not impossible, which is the most important thing. So he goes on the trip and he's getting himself all ready and he does what a lot of like white college age guys do. He gets a whole bunch of books and starts learning about what the trail is going to be like. I don't know why that makes you white, but you're hiking anyway, so you're probably white, let's just say. You're like get a book to teach you about the trail and he's obsessed with bear attacks. Have you ever been
Mhm.
obsessed with bear attacks?
So I have a great story as a great combo for this. My first time I moved to Yosemite when I'm 18 years old for
Right.
one of my first times out going on an overnight backpacking trip in Yosemite. I go up into Little Yosemite Valley, right? So that's going up the Happy Isles Trail. So that goes up Vernal Falls, and then you go up Nevada Falls, and you get up into Little Yosemite Valley, and that's kind of like the base camp for doing Half Dome, and then
Okay.
then you can continue on. Well, so that night I camp out and I thought I had done a good job of not having anything. I had gotten one of the canisters and turned out though I left some food in. I left like a couple of trail bars that I just missed in my backpack,
Which was in your tent.
which was just outside my tent.
Okay, at least it was outside your tent. All right.
Was just outside my tent. But I woke up in the middle of the night, rah, rah, scratching and tearing and rah, rah, like sound, like sniffing and just
Jeez.
gnarly, right? So I'm like, oh, you know
Yeah.
what? Profanity. Next morning, I get up and sure enough, man, it was a bear for sure, black bear, because
We ain't
it's
got no
Sierra
ain't got
Nevada.
no grizzlies in
Yeah,
California.
we don't have the grizzlies in the Sierra or
Not
uh,
anymore. They were
not
native to
anymore.
there. They've
Well,
been ex
California is the only state with an extinct species on its flag.
Think of it as being a variant of the black bears, like a cinnamon brown black bear, isn't it?
No, no, it was
Is that a
the
grizzly?
the golden bear was
It's
was
got a
its own.
hump, a
Yep,
Okay, I didn't realize that. All
yep,
right, fair
yep.
enough.
That was a bummer. I
Yeah.
mean, I wasn't injured. But my backpack was ruined. So that's a lesser
Sorry, what was the adjective you used to describe your backpack?
ruined.
You didn't say ruined.
What did I say?
You didn't pronounce it as ruined, which is an English word. You said ruined.
Ruined? Did I?
You
I
said
don't
my backpack
think
was ruined. I was like,
it was
wow,
ruined.
that's an old timey way to
Yes.
describe a backpack. That's like
Well, this is it. So, Dave, I think this is a perfect time to discuss. As part of your show, we have to toast as to whether or not this is a classic. And so we decided on a fabulous, and you've actually mentioned the place where our particular beverage was made, which is Gatlinburg, Tennessee.
I did not know that. Is it from Gatlinburg, Tennessee?
It is right
Oh, heck
outside Great
yeah. I
Smoky
see that.
National
I
Park.
see actually now that I take a closer look, I see that the outline of the state of Tennessee is engraved onto the bottle. And yes, there it is, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. It's in a mason jar,
It is.
basically,
Uh-huh.
and sold just that way. And the thing that we're drinking is Old Smoky Moonshine.
Good old corn liquor.
Yeah. Except I think real moonshine is much higher proof. Mine
Probably.
is, I think, 40 proof, which is like wine. So this,
I think it's supposed to technically be a variant of a whiskey.
I believe moonshine actually should have been a neutral grain spirit. So it should be like
Hmm.
vodka as it starts out. I don't think it
Hmm.
has anything in it. Obviously, you could age it or whatever, or treat it with something, but this is more like I don't even know if this is a distilled liquor. I mean, it's such a low alcohol
It's
percentage.
it
What's the alcohol
it's
percent?
it's
It's
like it's 40%. right?
Oh yeah,
So
it's
20,
35.
it's
Never mind. Never
20%,
mind.
it's 40
Never mind.
proof. It's 40 proof. It's
I thought it was
20%
40
ABV.
proof. I thought it was 40 proof. It's closer to 40%. So that explains why it tasted so strong when I had it. What flavor did you go with?
I got the blackberry, which I kind of like. It's a little tart, but also kind of sweet.
I love blackberry. Blackberry anything is like the way to go if you ask me. But I decided
What did
to
you went with? Yeah.
I decided to do it a little bit different. I got apple pie flavor.
Hmm.
So I have apple pie flavor Old Smoky Moonshine. I could have gotten strawberry. I could have gotten there was another one that actually had food in it, but the one I saw that they had was pickle flavored, and the pickle flavor actually had pickles in the jar. So I'm guessing you could take out pickles and eat them and get hammered,
So
which
for the record, is that something that you would appreciate? Is like fermented pickles?
I love pickles. Pickles are one of my favorite food in the world. I don't know if I would enjoy having pickle alcohol, but I'm just in
Yeah.
general, I really do like pickles. Like I'm a pickle guy, but
So I mean, they had like a peach one, which looked interesting. They had this one. They had the apple. I feel like they had a few other ones like that seemed like really over the top, like strawberries and cream, and like,
yes. Yeah.
and I'm
There
just
were
like, oh yeah, no,
a lot of things that if you ask me kind of betray the spirit of drinking moonshine. Like
yeah,
apples and cream is the opposite of what moonshine drinkers should be interested in. So I don't
right,
know. I thought apple pie and blackberry. Blackberries I associate with Virginia and Tennessee. So
absolutely.
I feel like that's appropriate. Apple pie I also associate with the Appalachians. Like there's a lot of apple picking areas and stuff like that. So I thought that was appropriate, but some of the other ones, not so much. And that's why we chose it basically because of the association with the Appalachian Mountains. So
That's right, and I think
that's
I think it I think it works out pretty well because it's so close to that portion of the AT.
how is yours?
Uh, it's really good. Yeah, I like it. It made me shift my vocabulary a little bit to say ruined.
Yeah, you said runt.
Yeah.
The next thing you're gonna say varmint and all kinds of
Varmint. I saw a pretty cool varmint today, actually. I Before coming on today after work, I went for a little walk, did a couple miles, and went out to Point Pinole, and I saw probably like about a 3 foot garter snake.
You guys have garter snakes in California? I thought that was a East Coast thing. I thought you guys
No,
had
no, we totally have them.
gopher snakes and bull snakes and
I don't know that I've ever seen like a rat snake in the wild.
what do you mean?
A rat snake in the wild?
Well,
No.
I mean, here that's one of the most common things you see is a rat snake. I've seen rat snake. The biggest snakes I've ever seen have been rat snakes. There was a black rat snake. I was walking around the pond with my uncle one time, and I swear to God, this thing was like 6 feet long. I mean, it was a really big snake for Virginia.
Well, Dave, the biggest snake I've seen out on a trail was with you on
What
the Appalachian Trail.
that freaking rattlesnake that I almost stepped on?
That I was like, hey Dave, why don't you take a quick step back?
So I don't think that was a 6 foot snake, but it was a 6 inch wide snake. It
It
was
was
one.
definitely
It
six
was
inch wide. I mean, we don't know. It was
it was
definitely coiled up, and
It was a
it was
very
sunning.
girthy, it was a very girthy snake, let's just say. Like,
Yeah.
no question about it. I'm very glad I did not step on that snake. For the listeners, I grew up in Virginia my whole life. The only venomous snake living where I live is the copperhead. And I never saw one my entire life. And I'm saying I spent my entire childhood in the forest and I never saw a copperhead. And I went up to the Appalachian Trail, Skyline Drive, and we took like a little sidewalk. I think we were on the AT, weren't we?
We were, yeah.
Yeah. So we were walking along, and there's a little ledge to look out on, and there's more than one copperhead
Oh,
basking in the
there
sun.
were a bunch of them.
There were like three or four,
There were like at
and
least three or four.
I was so excited and so taken aback by seeing this copperhead that I start like moving towards it with my camera to get a picture of the copperhead. And I'm standing on, they have these stone ledges that the CCC built all along Skyline Drive. And I'm standing on top of it and I'm looking out with my camera, getting close to get a picture of the copperhead. And Bill he had this incredibly calm voice. He was like, Dave, why don't you just step a little bit back towards me? And I was like, okay, sure. I mean, I didn't have a bad react. You didn't yell, "Oh my God!" and make me like, jump in. So I was like,
No,
all right.
that was intentional. That was
No,
purposeful.
I could tell. And I was like, all right, I'll do exactly what Bill says. And I stepped back and he was like, there is the biggest rattlesnake I've ever seen right under your feet. And I looked down and I could not believe the size of the snake. It wasn't in the open, so I wasn't completely oblivious.
No, it was really well covered.
It was in the undergrowth, but it was the kind of thing where if I hadn't known the copperheads were there, I might have just jumped over it onto the rocks anyway, just not seen that snake. And frankly, he probably would have just ignored me. But there was Small chance that I might have just stepped right onto this freaking thing and had a bad. I had a friend when I was a kid in elementary school, when he was a little tiny child, they were camping up on the Skyline Drive, and he was at exactly one of those places on Skyline Drive with the stone ledges, and he got bit by a rattlesnake, and he was 3 or 4 years
Oh
old.
wow.
And he ended up in the hospital for like a
I
week
would
because of the
I would
bite.
think
Like,
so, yeah.
it was very, very bad news. Like, it was like he almost didn't make it.
Getting us back to the book, I think that's one of the things that I think Bryson just does so well. He talks about like all these different animals. He talks about diseases and he talks about all these potential things that could go wrong. I mean, we saw live and in person, right? Like it could have that could have gone a couple of really bad ways, right? And so I think we were really fortunate. And I don't, from my recollection, having just read the book, I don't think that they ever really came across, or he never
Nope.
really shared anything like that. I
No,
mean,
he mentioned.
the biggest animal he came across was a moose.
Well, he had a mysterious encounter with something at the campsite, but whatever it was had reflective eyes, so it was not a bear.
Right.
It was
Well,
some.
bears will reflect
I don't
their
think
eyes,
so. I don't think a bear has a tapetum. I don't think they have the night vision.
don't they?
I
Oh,
don't know. I could be wrong, but I don't remember anybody ever telling me they saw the reflected light off. I think when you see that, you're dealing with a raccoon or a fox or something like that. But
dear.
actually, I don't know if a deer has that. I wrote a joke yesterday. You want to hear it? This rabbit sitting at a bar looks over, and this strange animal comes walking up, sits down next to him. He looks at me, says, "That's weird. Uh, you look really familiar. Like, I almost feel like we're related. Like, sorry, but what kind of animal are you?" The other animal says, "I'm a jack rabbit." And the rabbit says, "Why the long pause? You don't like that one?" Bill Bryson decides to go on this hike all the way up the Appalachian Trail. We agree on
And
that.
we
We
are
concur. We
we
concur.
concur. Concur.
So he decides to go on this hike up the Appalachian Trail, and he puts the word out to all of his people that he's going on a hike on the Appalachian Trail. Doesn't get a lot of responses. Nobody wants to go. But he
Or a
finally
lot of
gets
responses to the contrary of like, what are you thinking?
right. I feel like if I had the wherewithal to do it, I would have jumped on that invitation if somebody was doing that. He does get one person to go with him, and who is that, Bill?
Well, the pseudonym for this for his high school pal is this guy named Steven
Stephen Katz.
Katz. That's right, Steven
Real
Katz.
name is apparently Matt Angerer,
Yeah,
but
I read that.
I don't
I
know.
read that and doing a little bit of background on him.
I object to
Which
anybody being named Angerer. That's
anger.
yeah, I don't know what kind of name that is, but anyway. It's like the person who makes you mad is the Angerer. Katz comes along with him and turns out to be an excellent choice to go on the hike. What's wrong with Katz? Why is Katz not a good choice?
Well, Katz isn't exactly much of a hiker,
That's one way to put it.
nor is Katz particularly experienced in this practice. They just make a lot of really bad choices leading up to their.
Well, Katz introduces himself in the book by saying that he needs to eat like a ding dong once every 20 minutes or else he has seizures. I don't know if you can imagine the logistics of walking the Appalachian Trail, but you can't bring enough ding dongs to eat one every 20
uh,
minutes. So it's a
or
problem.
Snickers
Or
or
Snickers or
whatever it was.
yeah,
Yeah,
whatever the heck
Slim
it is.
Jims.
And as I'm reading the book, I can't help thinking like Katz is like a real person, right? Like theoretically, this is a real human being. And Bill Bryson is mean about this guy, like really mean about him. Bill Bryson's mean about every person they meet in this entire book. What's the name of the crazy lady they hang out with?
Oh, I mean, they literally ditched that poor lady.
I came into the book and I was
Did they get
hoping
the
I was.
name?
They did. They definitely did. But I came into the book hoping that Katz would be like this dynamic character and they'd get on the trail for a couple of weeks and Katz would change and he would turn into, a strong hiker and an outdoorsman and stuff. But no, Katz is just like a drunken lout, like just like a complete loser, like never changes or improves in any way, which is kind of a bummer. Although he does show like a nice side of the guy. The guy has a little bit of he's a little more fortitude than Bryson has. He's a little tougher. When they have
Mhm.
like a bear in the camp and Cass is just like, go to sleep, don't worry about the bear. I like that. That those are my favorite parts of him. But I was really rooting for Cats to be. I was thinking in the sense of like a fiction story where everybody would change and improve themselves and show some redeeming qualities, but it never ended up happening.
that never really materializes. They ditch Mary Ellen
Is it
in,
Mary
or
Ellen? Is
like
Mary Ellen is the name?
Mary Ellen.
The
Yeah.
fat lady, the fat lady that talks too much. I mean, he just says so many mean things about this poor person, and I'm
Oh my
like,
gosh.
this is a real human being who's out there in the world who has to read this book at some point. Like,
And can you imagine like going along, you're solo hiking a
uh-huh.
2,000 mile trail,
Yep.
2,000 plus mile trail,
Yep.
and you come across a couple of other people who are seemingly in a very similar mindset and physique, and they just decide to just ridicule and eventually literally ditch.
Ditch poor Mary Ellen, yeah. And she ended up quitting the trail afterwards, but they went to a town and they basically caught a ride to try and escape her while she was coming along behind them. Although
I mean, it's terrible to laugh about, but
it does sound like a pretty annoying person to hike with. Have you ever gone on a road trip with someone who sucked?
I mean, my longest road trip was like a cross country trip on a school bus that we converted over to biodiesel, and we had like 16, 17 people on board, and there were definitely some annoying people on that bus.
What? That's like a Ken Kesey type story.
Oh, it was very, yeah,
When was
like
that?
I was in college, and yeah,
Huh.
we drove from Humboldt County. We went up to the G8 protests in
Humboldt
Calgary.
County. Did you guys bring any weed with you?
We tried not to. And then, we were in Glacier National Park
Hmm.
night before before we were intending to cross the border up into Canada to continue on the drive up to Calgary. Yeah, so somebody had some marijuana.
Had you ever encountered marijuana before in your life at the time? Is that something new? You're living in Humboldt County. You were going to college there in the 90s. I feel like
Yeah,
maybe.
early 2000s. Yeah, I mean,
Did you
some
know I once
experience.
drove? I had four guys with me, and I drove back from Glacier National Park all the way back to DC in 36 hours.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it was bad. It was a very intense drive. And that involved one of the guys taking over. I went to sleep in Minneapolis, like as I was getting to Minneapolis, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna go sleep in the back of the car. Somebody else take over. And I woke up and the guys had decided to drive around the Minneapolis Beltway the second time because they figured, ah, we missed our exit. Let's just go all the way back around. So
Just
it's like an
shit.
extra like 80 miles around Minneapolis. Like,
So the crazy part is that we go up to Calgary, right?
uh,
We come back. We do like this massive protest with this crazy naturalist lady. His name's Starhawk. She's like this renowned spiritual awakening person, and we have this like huge circle. Like anyway, so we do this big like thing
drum
protest
circle? Was it
demonstration.
was it a drum circle?
It was bigger than a drum circle.
Oh,
All
okay.
right, it was crazy. It was wild.
Have
I'll
you
have to send you
have you ever
a really
have you
cool
ever
video
been
of
in a
it.
drum circle?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I actually have been in a drum circle and I participated. I feel like I think my new nickname should just be Venn diagram because I feel like I intersect with like all the kinds of people, if you know what I mean. I'm not
Uh-huh.
like like you're obviously you're like your childhood was like being a hippie, like very hardcore hippie, but it's like I know people that are hippies, but I also know like the other kinds of people too. Like I know some of the people who would have been at the G8 meeting that you guys were protesting. But I'm not one of them either. But like I know like my intersection just meets all the kinds of people. I don't know. But anyway, so
Google at some point, not necessarily right now. Google Starhawk Spiral Dance,
okay.
Calgary 2002.
Starhawk spot. Okay. All right. That comes up.
Yeah,
Something comes up.
yeah, the name, just the name Starhawk alone. So on the way back from this, right?
Right.
We come back. The
Well, you guys
U.S.
didn't go cross country.
No, we did. We went from Humboldt County. We went all the way up into like Montana. We crossed the border and drove all the way into Calgary, Alberta.
That's
And
not
then,
cross country.
well, it's not. No, I mean, we didn't go all the way across country. We went as far as like
Have you
Madison.
ever have you personally ever driven cross country?
Driven? No, I've taken a train.
Oh, that's interesting. I've
Yeah,
actually never done a cross country train, but I have
yeah.
driven cross country 6 or 7 times, I think. Like great big huge. I mean, I had this one trip. I think it ended up being the most epic drive of my life. I started in New Mexico, right? And I
Okay.
drove with Alex all the way across the southern United States, like over to Atlanta and then up to DC. Visited my family. And then we drove to Maine after that. And then from Maine, we drove across Quebec, across the upper peninsula of Michigan, and then into Minnesota, into North Dakota, and then went to Devil's Tower and drove back to to Las Cruces. And I
Thomas
think it
Cruises.
might have been
Wow.
a 10,000-mile trip. And it was just me and like an 8-year-old. Not even. I think he was 7 at the time. And it was just we just drove all that distance. It seemed perfectly normal at the time, but I'm looking back and I'm like, that's insane. Like that's an insane thing to do.
That's
But
a lot of driving.
it's a
Yeah.
lot of driving. It is a lot of driving. And I'm thinking back now, I'm like, what was I doing during all that time? I guess I was listening to music or a book or something. I don't know.
Okay, so last part of this. So we get back to the US
Oh,
border.
sorry. Right.
We get
Go ahead.
back to the US border. I know we've totally digressed.
So one of the most disappointing things to me about Bill Bryson in reading this book, one of the things that it probably surprised you as well, right? This is a person who's famous for writing about the outdoors. This guy hates the National Park Service and the National Forests. Like,
I would push back on that.
okay, do so.
Yeah. So and this is why. In the book, he talks about just the prolific wastefulness of the bureaucracy
Yeah,
of the National Park Service. But he also points out how like the people on the ground, like park rangers and educators and those folks, volunteers, so forth, really truly care.
he does.
I think it's a really valid and an important distinction between like the bureaucracy that is, you know, the Department of the Interior and the like and National Park Rangers that, you know, the bureaucracy is just super wasteful and can just ruin a place.
I mean, so myself, I'm a gadfly, right? Like, I believe in pointing out problems where there are problems, but do you feel okay saying there's bad things the National Park Service is doing? Like, pointing out that there's waste in the National Park Service?
I think so. Yeah.
Aren't you afraid that Doge is going to sweep down and destroy the parks if you even mention that they have flaws?
Aren't they already?
Well, but don't you think you're going to make it worse, is what I'm saying. Don't you think you should constantly say that the National Park Service is perfect and angelic and never makes any,
I
needs more
mean,
money?
from
God, for God's sake, we should give them as much money as we could possibly give them,
should we do those things? Yes, absolutely. Do we need to have the administrators overseeing all of that? Are those is that where those cuts could be made? Like, do we need to have deputy under secretary of?
I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here. Obviously, I feel like
So am I.
no.
So
I
am
feel
I.
like they should just
So
give
am
the
I.
money to the freaking Rangers and let them run the parks. But
I agree
obviously, in a
entirely.
lot of ways, that's not possible. So I guess I kind of understand why there's some bloat. And really, when we're talking about bloat in the National Park Service, we're talking about $1 billion for the entire National Park Service, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe not even. I think it's about that. And the United States government wastes hundreds of billions on everything. Like it's the cost of one stealth bomber to run the entire National Park Service. So I feel like we should keep that in perspective when we're talking about how much waste they're doing, which is very indicative of the kind of things that are going on right now with the government, like where people are complaining about USAID, and it's like let's say we spent $1 billion on USAID and saving African kids from malaria, and it's like, did they do everything perfectly? Did they give money to trans women doing interpretive dance in Lima, Peru? Yeah, they probably did, but that was like $30,000. That I don't love that program, but you spent $1 billion on the entire USAID and you saved 400,000 little kids from dying from malaria. Maybe that's not where we need to cut.
Are you
Maybe,
saying that you don't think they're gonna get to like a couple trillion in savings?
yeah, exactly. So maybe this is not the things that we need to be complaining about. Maybe we need to be complaining about something else. Some other larger programs or deployments to foreign countries. That I have to say, as much as I think Trump is a flaming, he has not actually invaded anybody. And I think
Yeah.
he's the only American president in my entire lifetime to not invade anybody.
I mean, he's got another like 1,300 plus days.
I think he doesn't believe in doing that. And I think that's actually probably a pretty good freaking policy for an American president is to not invade anybody. As
No.
much as I cannot stand this man and I hate everything about him and I think we're sliding into fascism, I'm kind of down with why don't we do like a 10-year drought of invading anybody? Let's just try that out. Let's see what we could maybe do with those hundreds of billions of dollars in our own country and not invade anybody.
So are you saying that's a benefit of isolationism?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But you don't need to be isolationist. You just need to not invade anybody. I'm talking about a happy middle ground where
Okay.
we remain involved in like international treaties and like we're part of the international banking system and we send money to help African kids not die of malaria, but maybe we don't invade anybody. I don't know if you need to be isolationist. I mean, we have to be ready to fight the bad guys. You don't need to go invade anybody and like try to occupy countries and like change the way they do things. Like,
Do we need a 51st state? And would Canada be the first on that list of 51st states to
no, I think we should pick them
do?
apart province by province. You shouldn't try to take the entire thing. You should just conquer British Columbia
Like
so
out
that
here? Like up in
like
like
we yeah, we should move in. We should take British if
not Quebec first and then move
who
westward?
wants Quebec? Leave Quebec by themselves. Quebec is the last one you take. Quebec, you leave Quebec attached to the rest of
Yeah.
Canada so they can
Alberta's pretty gnarly. Sorry.
you leave the Quebecois with the rest of Canada, just Quebec and Ontario fighting over language while we slowly pick apart the rest of the country and add it to us. That's the way we should do it. So
Oh,
we
okay.
we
All right.
we go after British Columbia first, and we take it's beautiful, by the way. We
So
just
President Trump, if you're listening,
yeah. We add British Columbia to America. That's our main thing. You don't try to take all of Canada. That's crazy talk. You slowly go one by one. It's like so that everybody can be like, oh, when they came for the British Columbians, I said nothing. And then when they came for the Albertans, I said nothing. And then when they finally came for me, there was no one left to support me. That's how we should do it. We should divide and conquer. Or
well,
maybe,
clearly.
honestly, maybe the smartest thing would be Prince Edward Island first. Nobody will fight for Prince Edward Island. There are a lot of
Like,
people in America who are fans of Anne of Green Gables, so they might protest. But let's be honest, the
I
military is
mean,
not
they might
composed of Anne of
protest,
Green
but
Gables fans. What do you think of his bear advice? Does he
look,
know what he's talking about when he
no,
tells you what to do about bears?
no.
He does mention you're not supposed to run, which is 100% the correct advice.
I mean, the correct advice there, yeah, depending on the type of bear that you're dealing with. Yeah, if you have a black bear, you make yourself as big as possible. If you're dealing with a brown bear, you make yourself as small as possible.
No, I don't think that's true. I think if the brown bear attacks you, you curl up into a ball and try to not be killed. That's when
You don't run from either one. You
you
don't you
don't
don't
run
try
from
to
either,
you don't
dude.
you don't try to climb anything from either one.
No, when I was a kid, I was actually camping in the Smokies, and the ranger told us, I mean, this is not relevant for the Smokies, but he was talking about if you go out west, if you want to find out whether a bear is a grizzly or a black bear, what you do is you climb up a tree, and if the bear climbs up the tree after you and eats you, it was a black bear. And if the bear knocks the tree down and eats you, it was a grizzly.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately though, that I don't know that helps the individual.
Well, you get the identification though. You're the positive identification.
True, true.
That's
I mean,
that's
I would
good for
probably
science.
I would probably charge a black bear.
It's not a terrible idea. A black bear is not a huge ant. Most black bears I've seen in person are not gigantic animals.
No, they're really not.
They can be. They
They
can
can
be.
be.
They can be bigger than any human male that has ever existed. They can be six.
Absolutely.
Generally speaking, I've seen lots of black bears in the wild, and generally speaking, it is like dog sized, like big dog. It's like a big dog. It's like running into a big dog when you're in the wild. It's an animal you can scare. If you wave your arms and make a big noise, it's going to go away.
I mean,
99 times out of 100.
I scared off a grizzly.
I know. Yeah, tell that story. I like that one. That's a good
That
one.
was that was a good story. I just, I was like, well, if I'm gonna die here, at least I'm gonna get a good picture of the animal that is going to kill me. I was walking up a trail and this brown bear was walking down a trail. This is when I was back in 2006. I was living and working in
2006,
Yellowstone.
that recently.
Yeah, yeah, it
Huh.
was not that long ago. That
Okay.
was when I was in grad school.
Not that
Time.
long ago, only 20 years ago.
Only 19 years ago. Yeah, yeah. I was walking up a trail. It was walking down this trail. It hadn't seen me yet. I was like, "Oh crap, that's a grizzly bear." I'm like, "Okay, well, what am I gonna do?" I didn't have a whistle. I didn't have like bear
spray.
spray. I
Yeah.
didn't have anything of the sort, and I was like, well, if I try to walk down this trail at this point, it's going to be a really long walk back. Probably would have been the better choice,
That's
but
the
it's
smartest choice. We were up in Alberta, actually, not Banff, but Yoho National Park, walking in the
okay.
back country, and we were just talking to the ranger that was walking with us, and she said that there was a bunch of people from somewhere in the States, and they came up and they were walking down the trail, and a grizzly came out on the trail, like block the trail. And so what you do is you turn around, and you go home.
Yeah.
If a grizzly's in the middle of the trail and you won't leave. So what do these people do? They just go their bear spray and nuked this bear. It didn't do anything to anybody
No, it's
except
just gonna
be
tick the darn thing off.
it just was in the middle of the trail. So they nuked it with bear spray. It ran away and they ended up having to like remove the bear. I don't know if they shot the bear, but it was like because it had had an unpleasant interaction with humans, this poor bear is like treated like a mangy dog. Anyway.
Well, and that happened a lot when I was living in Yosemite. I
Uh-huh.
had a lot of encounters. The bear population in Yosemite Valley in particular really
Hi.
overcrowded. Bears have learned really well how to take advantage of all the human millions of dollars in damage to personal vehicles in Yosemite Valley every year
Hmm.
because people just ignore this idea that like bears can smell really well.
Yeah.
Um, so they'll just destroy cars getting at food. And then what ends up happening is if there are those bad experiences and the bears are caught, they're generally moved out to the backcountry somewhere. But bears have a tendency to want to come back to where they were. So that happens a couple of times, and then eventually, yeah, they have to.
My ex-girlfriend, her dad had like a whole bunch of friends, and he worked for EPA and had a whole bunch of like granola, type of friends, like the kinds of people that we like.
That I
And
like me, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And so he said this one friend of his was on Kodiak Island, and they had like a cabin that they were supposed to stay in, and he decided it'd be a good idea to sleep out under the stars. So he's sleeping out on the cabin, and I don't know if the name Kodiak rings a bell to you, because there's big goddamn bears on
Hmm.
Kodiak Island, right? Like
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
biggest bears, like some of
Those
the
are the big.
biggest
Those are
bears,
really big ones. Yeah.
the biggest bears in the world. So he's sleeping out in his sleeping bag under the stars, and wakes up in the middle of the night. Oh, big surprise! There's he feels the bears like pushing him around, like checking him out in his sleeping bag. And he said he was sleeping on his back, and he said to himself inside his head, he was like, would I rather be bitten on the front of my body or the back of my body? And he was like, okay, I think it'd be best to be bitten on the back of my body. So he rolled over, and that's when the bear picked him up in its mouth, lifted him 10 feet in the air, and is like thrashing him around there. And he like punched the bear in the face, and it dropped him. I don't think it knew he was a thing. I don't think it knew he was like a living creature. I don't think it was trying to prey on him. It just thought maybe there's some weird smells, maybe there's some food, right? So it got him up in the and the guy ended up having like 60 stitches like up and down his entire butt, just ripped all up, just from the bear picking him up for 3 seconds. Gigantic beast of an animal, like just picking him up and destroying him. But anyway, he survived, but it was a nightmare, a literal nightmare, like something in the middle of the night that
Yeah, that's the one thing that I never hope happens in any of my encounters. I mean, I was fortunate to just take, I had a little point and shoot camera
right.
in this is back in Yellowstone. And, I took a photo and the flash went off
Hmm.
and it had to have been the flash that sent the bear running in the opposite direction. It was probably a good 30, 40, maybe even 50 feet away, but it could have easily made up that distance.
Before you even know it.
Yeah.
Like before you even know it, it could have crossed. There's a story I heard. There was a guy, he was in Alaska. He's working on a fishing boat, like sort of one of these areas where the fishing boats all come together. So there's a whole bunch of them together, and there was a lot. And it was in the middle of summer, so it was the middle of the night, but it was bright light out. And this guy crosses from building to building, and as he's halfway between buildings, he turns around and there's a grizzly. And it looks at him, and he's looking at the other building. It's like 50 feet away. And he's like, all right, I can make it to the next building. So he takes off running, runs to the door of the building, opens the door, dives inside the building. And he's like, phew, I'm okay. And he looks back, and the bear had caught him and just ripped open the back of his legs and like just, it had
Oh,
it had caught him in the span of like a second and a half. and just taken one swipe at him and just tore him open, to all up and down the back of his body. Again, he survived, but it was like a massive injury before he even knew it had happened. Why do you think this book resonated with people? Why do you think people liked it?
I think it speaks to the desire and the interest in getting outside and conquering this idea of being able to go and do something that someone is saying, hey, this is something that's going to be really hard. Can you do this?
Do you remember Halloween of, oh man, like I want to say
Eight or
2011,
nine?
2011,
No.
a little later. We went and we were supposed to go to this Halloween party. We had a case of beer and we ended up on the wrong side of a national park. You and I were like, maybe we could just walk from the wrong side of the national park across the national park to the Halloween party. And we put a bunch of beers in our pocket and we were walking through the forest in the middle of the night. And I remember looking at you and I was like, man, this is so stupid, but I have never been happier in my life. I feel like we should just walk across this forest in the middle of the night.
And we kept going for a
We
while,
kept
right? And
going longer
finally
than we should have. We kept
both
going
of
longer than
our
our
wives were
wives were in
sitting
the car.
with some buddy of yours.
Yeah, it was Crazy Ronnie. Yeah. R.I.P. Crazy Ronnie. Yeah, he was in the car hanging out with the wives, and you and I walked off into the woods. Anyway, but the sense of like mastery of your own destiny, right? Like just being like, I need to go to this place. I'm going to leave this car. I'm just going to go there on my feet. And the purity and the quiet. And it was like, I get like this is a very small example of what we're talking about with like hiking the Appalachian Trail, but like to get away from it all the cacophony of modern life, just going after you all the time. There's an appeal to that. And I think that's why people like this book. I think that's why this book appeals to people. The idea that you could just get away from it all and do something with your own feet, not have to do. I mean, how many things do you have? I mean, how many things do you have crying for your attention on a daily basis right now in
Like
your actual life?
in my work life, I have like
No, your whole
170.
holistically your whole life, not even just your work, but like family, work, car, sending you a message, you check engine, like every single little thing that's going
All of
after you.
those things, right?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
just get away from that and escape it. Do something stupid like walk for 20 days. But that appeals to me on a level I could not even describe to you to just escape it all and do that. And I think that's why this book, I think that's why this was a popular book. And this is a popular this is 1998. This is before people were completely inundated with things crying for their attention all day long.
Before the onset of social media, before the onset of cell phones, before all
Before
those things. Yeah.
the phone in your pocket all day, just
Yeah.
going after you. Did anything surprise you about a walk in the woods? You've never read this before, right?
I had read it, but it had been a long
Oh,
time.
okay, 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 okay,
So I got this book as a birthday gift back in like 2010, right?
okay. Did you call the
Uh,
person that gave it to you as a birthday present and let them know that you finally read it?
no, I mean I had read it at that point.
Okay. All right.
I had read it back then,
Okay.
and then you and I started discussing it. I had gone back and I had read it. It took us a little while to get to this one because we had done a few other things. I went back and I read it a second time in addition. So I've read
Oh.
it. I've read the book like 3 times now.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
Yeah,
recently you went back and read it. That's kind of what I did with Into the Wild. I really got into that one. That one really,
that was another great book.
I
Yeah,
read that and then I read like the one by his sister and I went off on the Into the Wild mythos. I mean, that guy went to the same elementary school as me. So it
yeah,
was
that's
very,
wild.
that one hit home. Did anything surprise you?
You know what surprised me is his was Bryson, and to a lesser extent, I think Katz's. They. I mean, I don't want to call it a failure because they speak to the fact that like they didn't see it as a failure. The fact that they didn't finish.
Right.
They got to Maine, and granted, it was like in these
They didn't
short.
walk to Maine from
They
Georgia.
didn't walk all the way from Maine to
Yeah.
Georgia, from Georgia to Maine, I mean. But they decided to get to Maine and do like the last large 100-mile section. And they get out there and they're just like, why? Why are we doing this? We've done it. And I don't know, I feel like I would have a really big sense of really just needing to for that completion.
So normally we do biggest surprise, we do parallel. Like one person talks about their biggest surprise, and the other person also has their biggest surprise. That's my biggest surprise. I can't stand that. I can't stand the idea that they didn't walk the whole thing. That drove me crazy. They got as far as Gatlinburg and they just gave up and they did the rest of it in little, it's a long way to walk. But if you're going to do this, I can't believe that the book about hiking the Appalachian Trail was written by somebody that didn't hike the whole Appalachian Trail. Like, am I crazy?
I don't think you are, and I'm curious to know, like since late '90s, right? '98
No.
has how much has because he had talked about how like he would continue hiking, he couldn't consider himself a through hiker, as in
Right.
someone who did the whole thing in one long.
I mean, it's ridiculous. I can't believe you wrote the whole book about the Appalachian Trail. You didn't do the whole thing. I don't get that. Like that bothers me so much. It's like I'm trying to think of an example. It's like if you wrote a book about competing in the Olympics and then didn't get on the plane to go to the Olympics at the last second. Like what? I don't know. It bothers me. That's my biggest surprise. 100%. I totally agree. 100% my biggest surprise is
Yeah,
that this is written by a guy who did not hike the whole Appalachian Trail. And
yeah,
it's not something that nobody does. There's little
yeah.
old ladies that complete the Appalachian Trail.
Right. So somebody just did. There in the news recently. There was somebody did the AT in just a ridiculously short period of time. Like they were like people are like ultra marathon running
Right.
the AT at this point.
But I feel like that person's got to have like supplies set up for them
They
and stuff.
do. They do.
Like
They have like supply people, like
you
supply
can imagine
groups.
somebody training to the point where they could run 50, 60 miles a day if they're not carrying anything. But
And then they just fall asleep like on the trail and like get up the next day and run again. I think that's something that this kind of brings out of people who enjoy getting outdoors is are these stories. I think he's a great storyteller.
yeah, yeah, I totally think. We didn't even talk about the whole Centralia thing. The town that's like has a coal fire burning underneath it and was
Oh
completely
my gosh, that's all crazy, right? That's all
yeah,
wild.
that's
Yeah,
nuts. That's a nuts story. That an entire town in Pennsylvania, something caught fire to the seam of coal that was underneath the entire town, and everybody just had to evacuate. So there's 5 people left in the entire town. That was once a town, like 20,000 people living in this town, and
yeah,
it's still there today in
yeah,
2025. It's supposed to
yeah,
burn for like another 100 years.
yeah.
And that's nuts. We talked about our biggest surprises. I think we know what those are. Who chose this?
I think it was kind of mutual,
Kind of mutual.
but
I'll blame it on myself. So I'm gonna
okay.
ask you. I'm gonna ask you. Do you think we should toast this classic?
I do think we should toast this. I think we should toast this book because I think it's something that speaks for and to us both and to a lot of people. I think he descriptively talks about a lot of really in-depth elements and pieces to the history of the AT, which I thought with that part of it, like the research and background that he put into to writing on that was just as valuable as the more narrative pieces
Um,
of the book. Some of those narrative pieces, I was like, okay, Katz, this guy's kind of a jerk,
we didn't talk
right?
enough about Cats, but I feel like Cats is actually fake. I don't think that's the real character. I think that's
I
like
mean,
a
it's a real person, right? Like
it's a
it
real
is a
person, but
pseudonym.
it's yeah, it's a pseudonym, but it's not just a pseudonym. I think it's kind of a fictionalization of a person turned into a character, like taking a person and turning them into something more and less than they really were. And I think that was kind of interesting, but that's a whole different thing to talk about. So you are voting for this. You are
I am
toasting.
voting for it. I am toast.
Okay.
I am on board with toasting A Walk in the Woods.
Okay. I'm also on the record as
Cheers.
toasting this. I enjoyed this. This is a good book. And I feel like it's in a thread of American writing that's all about the wilderness and like how somebody goes up against the wilderness alone in a lot of ways. It's comical. It's fit in the history of things like Thoreau. I think it fits into the canon of American outdoor literature. And yeah, totally. Vote for it. 100%. Cheers, everybody. This is Dave
Clink.
MacArthur.
And Bill Hodges.
We are signing off. Thank you for joining us on Toasting the Classics. Peace out, everybody.
Bye, everybody.